He would say, he would introduce me. He would say, "This is Mr. John. He is from America. He is an expert photographer." Those three things he would always mention. And he just encouraged me, even though he said I could not stay. I could understand that Srila Prabhupada knew my heart. As Vishakadevi was saying, that Srila Prabhupada could look into your heart and tell what was there, what was the desire, what desires were there, and sometimes it was very uncomfortable. So Srila Prabhupada, I felt, was personally encouraging me to come to Krishna consciousness. And then at one point we were at the Kumbh Mela in Allahabad, and I was taking pictures at the bathing ghat. And all of a sudden I was grabbed from behind by some police, soldiers actually, and my camera was ripped away from me, and I was taken to a tent, a police tent, and tied to the post in the center of the tent. They thought I was taking pictures of the ladies bathing, so they confiscated my camera. So Srila Prabhupada found out about it, and he sent a note. He said in the note that this is Mr. John. He is with our party. He is a nice boy. Please release him. And I was released. So Srila Prabhupada in that way saved me again. And actually during the Kumbh Mela, I would meet different yogis and swamis, but none of them compared to Srila Prabhupada. Some were actually very proud, and some were actually somewhat ridiculed my wanting to come to India and searching for real knowledge. They seemed to not care very much. But Srila Prabhupada was just the opposite. In that way, he endeared himself to all of us. And of course, that compassion is still there, available for everyone, for all time.
More? Are we finished? Oh, Calcutta Temple. You sure? Since in college, both my husband and I went to Rochester Institute of Technology. We were both studying photography. And by it was time for Yadavara Prabhu to do his master's thesis, so he went to India with the first wave of devotees that Srila Prabhupada took to India in the fall of 1970. And then from that point on, a couple of times a week, I would get these handwritten aerograms from India in which he was describing his experiences. How, for instance, they went to Surat, and the mayor of Surat closed the schools and factories so the people could attend the Harinam, and the people would line the streets and put so many garlands on the devotees that it would pile up so the devotees couldn't see, and they had to start taking off their garlands. And how the devotees would be hosted at different Vaishnavas' houses in Surat, and they would be filled up to the neck with feasts 3 times a day. So these letters were amazing to me, and finally I became free of my duties in America, and I got a letter from Yadavara Prabhu, "Why don't you come? It's a wonderful opportunity for photography." So I arrived in India in March, approximately February, March of 1971, which was the time the devotees had organized the first great pandal here in Mumbai, across Maidan. And we know from the journey home that Radhanath Swami also was attending that same pandal. I was with the devotees, so they wrapped me up in a sari and sat me on the stage. And on the stage there was only one person of Indian origin, Srila Prabhupada. And in the audience of 15,000 people, perhaps there was one person of American origin or Western origin. Radhanath Swami, perhaps. So I couldn't understand Prabhupada's lectures very well. I didn't have a background in religion, and neither was I prepared to become religious. That was not why I'd come to India. So for me it was quite a bizarre experience, but I was very impressed by how the people revered Srila Prabhupada. Just the awe in their faces towards him, and their reverence towards him, and their supplication towards him. That was something extraordinary. After the pandal was over, it was about perhaps a 10-day pandal, Yadavar Prabhu and I decided that we wanted to do a National Geographic type story on a quaint Indian village. That's the type of thing that National Geographic would be attracted to. But since there are thousands and thousands of villages in India, we had no idea which one would be appropriate for our photographic story. So we thought, well, Srila Prabhupada is Indian, he grew up here, he's traveled widely in India, he'll be able to tell us where to go for this purpose. So we went to his room in the Akash Ganga building, it was on the 7th floor, and he had what would have been called the master bedroom. It's right by the ocean, perhaps you know of that, and the sea breezes were blowing through and billowing up the very light white curtains, and Prabhupada was sitting as he traditionally did with white bolsters behind him and on his sides. And there was perhaps one or two other devotees in the room, and we came in and explained our mission, what we wanted to do. And Prabhupada paused and he looked at us and he said, very seriously, he said, "You do not speak the language. Wherever you go, they will simply cheat you and steal your cameras." So we were crestfallen. That was the end of our brilliant idea, we thought. So he paused. There was like an electric moment. And he could see how we were, discouraged. And he said, "Best you go to Vrindavan and do your story in Vrindavan." So we didn't do that right away. First we went to Nepal for some time. We went trekking in the Himalayas. And then finally we came to Vrindavan. It was perhaps July 1971. And that was the first instruction that Srila Prabhupada had given us, and given me, perhaps. And that was a transformative experience. We spent perhaps 1 month in Vrindavan, and at that time there were only 2 people in Vrindavan that spoke English. Now even the rickshawallas speak English. But then there was Prabhupada's godbrother, O.B.L. Kapoor, living there, who spoke perfect English, and another elderly gentleman who every night would treat us to Alfonso mangoes and milk and parathas, which was a divine combination. Transformative combinations. And we would sit under the night Vrindavan sky while this wonderful devotee treated us in this way and told us about Krishna. And all day I would photograph, and I was so moved by the piety of the residents of Vrindavan, the Brijbasis. There were about 300 widowed women that would chant the Maha Mantra every day for 3 hours. And they would chant it with such feeling, such emotion, not the way we chant with one leader and everyone else responding, but there would be half of them would sing the mantra, no instruments, while the other half was quiet, and then they would switch. And it wasn't what you would call sweet musical vibration, but it was just from the heart, and it touched my heart also. So I was transformed by that experience, and I was ready to stay in Vrindavan indefinitely. At that time there were no ISKCON devotees, but they would stop on their way between Delhi and Mumbai. They would stop in Vrindavan, and one of those that stopped there was Gurudas Prabhu, and along with his good wife at that time, Jamuna Prabhu. And Jamuna and I would sit in the Jamuna River, like the buffaloes do, just sit there, and she would tell me all about Krishna. And perhaps you know her, she's been to Mumbai, and she has such an attractive, captivating nature, which also helps me tremendously. And Gurudas Prabhu said, "We want to make an all-Indian Vyasa Puja book for Srila Prabhupada." And knowing our background, he wanted Yadavar and I to take charge of that publication, and it was going to be done from Calcutta. So very reluctantly, I left Vrindavan with Yadavar Prabhu. We went to Calcutta. So Maharaj, Chandravali Maharaj has instructed me to tell you about Calcutta. Ordinarily I wouldn't, but since Maharaj has instructed me. At that time, the war was going on between India and Bangladesh, and there was 1 million refugees from Bangladesh in Calcutta. So when we got out of the train station, there was a narrow aisle for us to walk out the train station, and on either side, people had laid down blankets, and each blanket was a home for a family. Husband, wife, children, pots, pans, clothes. The whole train station was like that. Because the whole city was inundated with these refugees. So we went out of the train station, and the situation was not better. People would take these burlap bags for potatoes and open them up and sew them together and make a tent, and families would live in that sort of a tent. Or if there was an large open drain pipe, you'd have several families living. The whole city was in this state of emergency. And somehow that invaded the Calcutta ISKCON temple, to the point that there was a small group of devotees there, but somehow they couldn't manage to keep the temple clean. They had hired, because they couldn't figure out how to use Indian utensils in the kitchen, they couldn't cook very well or shop very well, so they had hired what they thought was an Indian Brahmin cook. And he was Indian, but he was not a Brahmin and not a cook. So the prasadam was inferior, and devotees fell sick. Giriraj Das Brahmachari was one of the first to fall sick, but gradually, one by one, the devotees fell sick. And the devotees would argue with each other. There was tension between the men and the women. They would argue if there would be a bunch of bananas, and somebody would say they're offered, and somebody else would say no, they're not offered, and that would be an argument. The doors of the deities would be closed, and someone would sit with their back to the closed doors, and there'd be an argument whether that was an offense or not. So I thought I have better things to do with my life than try to be a Hare Krishna devotee. It was such an uncomfortable experience. So from the very bottom of my backpack, I got out the admission forms for Rochester Institute of Technology. I'd gone for 2 years, and I had received associate in applied science, but there were 2 more years I could complete. So I started filling in those little boxes, as you do, and just doing that, I felt some relief. I would get out of this very tense, uncomfortable situation. But there was one devotee in the temple named Chitralekha Devi Dasi, and she understood my drift, my thought process. And she said to me, "You can't leave now because Srila Prabhupada is coming." And that phrase became my mantra. I couldn't leave now because Srila Prabhupada was coming. And finally, after weeks and weeks of chanting this mantra and holding on by a thread, Srila Prabhupada came. I think, if I remember, it was October 28th, 1971. And he sat on the Vyasasana and looked at his very distraught Calcutta crew. And the next morning he called for an istagosti in his room. And he wanted each and every devotee to be there. And he looked around, he saw someone was missing. And he said to Radhanath Swami, "Where is Himavati? You go and bring Himavati, Prabhu." So we had to wait, and finally every devotee was there, Prabhupada's servants and the pujaris. And then Prabhupada began to speak. And he spoke the very basic Krishna conscious philosophy that we are familiar with, but he spoke it with such feeling, with such emotion, that it became so much more meaningful to us, about tolerance, about steadfastness, about understanding that there is a higher cause, not being so disturbed by the tribulations which affect our bodies and our minds, but understanding that we are above that there is a purpose for these tribulations, we can learn from them, and we can transcend them. That is within our power to do that, having this human form of life. And when he spoke about tolerance, he gave an example from his own life. Srila Prabhupada said that when he first came to America, he had to share a refrigerator with someone who was keeping meat in that refrigerator. And he said the word meat with such disgust that for the first time I realized what an austerity it must have been for a person of that caliber to undergo that. So when I had entered Prabhupada's room, which is the same room now that it is in the Calcutta temple, and even to this day when I go in that room, I remember where I sat for that ISKCON. It was such a profound effect on me. And when I entered the room, I felt like Atlas carrying the burden of the world on my shoulders. And after hearing Prabhupada's words, when I walked out of the room, I felt like I was floating. So I was completely impacted by the potency of transcendental sound, transcendental knowledge, given by someone who's realized that knowledge, someone who's in the line of parampara. It was a great milestone in my continuing attempt to be Krishna conscious. Is that okay?
As usual, Srila Prabhupada knew exactly what to do to bring us to the point of Krishna consciousness, beginning with his instruction to go to Vrindavan, because that's where Vishaka Devi became, her consciousness changed quite dramatically. I also remember that Istagosti, that actually toward the end of that Istagosti, when Mataji raised her hand and she said, Srila Prabhupada, actually there are no problems. Srila Prabhupada said, yes, you have understood correctly. In Krishna consciousness, there are no problems. So these inconveniences were actually quite minor compared to the importance of our real work of becoming Krishna conscious. And sometimes we have to tolerate so many difficulties. Even today, recently I had an operation that for me was extremely difficult. The recuperation process, for some reason that was destined for me at this time. But and sometimes, we never, in other words, we never know when an extreme, difficult situation will happen to us. I had no idea that was coming, and all of a sudden it was there. So Krishna has described this material world as miserable. He also uses the word deplorable in the Bhagavatam. And I don't think we oftentimes forget that this is such a difficult place in so many ways. The more we become attached to someone in this material world, to that degree, we have to suffer because of whatever may happen. And of course, the final separation is death. So in the meantime, there may be disease, there may be accidents, there may be so many things that can cause extreme pain. But Krishna says we should basically tolerate it and understand that it is a miserable place, and understand that there is a much better place described in the Bhagavad Gita, and that our only business is to work in this lifetime to not to have to take another birth and go to that wonderful place full of knowledge, eternal life full of knowledge and bliss. So Srila Prabhupada has given us a treasure house, and oftentimes we forget the value of that treasure house, and we become diverted by so many things that can divert us in this material world, seeking our own satisfaction, seeking our own pleasure. So I'm just praying that I will be able to stick to that path and not become diverted, as sometimes has happened in the past. So we require blessings for that. And there's such a wonderful lecture this morning about blessings. And actually we were a little confused before, for some time as to, devotees would ask for our blessings. But we weren't sure how to give those or what that actually meant. But it means basically, as His Holiness Radhanath Swami mentioned, that to be pleased. If you're pleased with someone, then the blessings are automatically there. So we just hope that we've not committed too many offenses in the past, and that we'll be able to come back time and time again to this wonderful temple, wonderful association. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Let us sincerely thank Vishaka Prabhu and Yadubar Prabhu for their very merciful kindness to us. Haribo. Yadubar Prabhu was speaking about how important it is to unite on a higher principle without ulterior motives. When Srila Prabhupada asked us to cooperate together, considering the nature of Kali Yuga, nature of Kali Yuga. It's a great challenge. I think I told you the story how some years ago in Italy, with a group of devotees, we decided to get completely away from everything of modern civilization. We walked for about an hour and a half through a forest. And one devotee, he had explored beforehand where there was a fantastic ancient cave. It was a big cave where all of us could fit. And it was a cave where, like 700-800 years ago, some Christian monks used to go and meditate and pray. And there was nothing around that cave except forest for about an hour walk. I was so inspired. I was giving a lecture about caves. Talking about how here we are completely separated from modern civilization. We are literally back in time. This is exactly how it was when the ancient rishis were living in the Himalayan jungles and caves. And as I was speaking, a cell phone went off. Cellular phone. It was the temple president of Rome. And it had this really strange sound. So we cannot escape these influences. When Srila Prabhupada asked us to cooperate in this age of Kali, it's a great challenge, because it is the age that the predominant influence is quarrel and hypocrisy. We see these two qualities so widespread everywhere. The tendency to quarrel over insignificant issues. But then the nature of the mind that is not finding inner fulfillment is the tendency to make insignificant things seem so important. Things that are practically meaningless, we interpret to be so meaningful. Fights, arguments, divorce, wars, based over trifling things that are interpreted to be so important. As long as we do not focus our consciousness on higher principles, they are important. At least they seem that way. If there's a little hill in front of your house and that's all you've ever seen, it seems gigantic. But if you look at the Himalayan mountains, then that little hill is insignificant because you've seen something greater. Krishna is great. Devotion is great. The satisfaction of bhakti is great. When we have some connection to that, some experience of that, then all of these little things, we see it for what it is. In other words, Maya means that which is not. Things that really have nothing to do with us, nothing to do with reality, obsess us, possess us, rule over us, and cause us to fight, to battle, to become envious, to become angry. Param dristvani vartate. We can only overcome these things when we experience something higher. That's the real solution. So there is a classic story in Srimad Bhagavatam about this, where something that actually apparently was very significant and important was later on to be seen for what it was. This is in the 4th canto, where Maharaj Prithu, he's a Shaktivesh avatar, in the role of a devotee, of course. Krishna tells in Gita, what leaders do, the followers naturally imbibe that spirit. Parents are leaders of the family. Teachers are leaders of their classroom. Friend leaders are leaders of their assembly of friends. Political leaders, leaders within the society, they may be sports figures or entertainers or politicians. Wherever there's a following, what the leader does is going to very seriously influence people. So Prithu appeared in a very extraordinary way. We're not going to go into details now. And practically immediately, the great sages and the Brahmins and the common people were glorifying him. And Prithu Maharaj was so honest and so humble. He said, I haven't done anything yet. Why are you glorifying me? They were doing on the basis of his horoscope and on the basis of people who were reading into the future. He said, you shouldn't glorify me. I haven't done anything. Let me do something. Then you can speak if you want. This is something very important to understand. Ultimately, Krishna explains in Gita, ahankara, that, what is that? Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karamani saravasha. That people who are bewildered by this false ego think themselves to be the doers of their activities. Actually, for a materialistic person, they're simply puppets of the modes of nature. The modes of nature is empowering us to do what we can do. And ultimately, mayadhyakshena prakriti suyate sacharacharam. Krishna is a controller of material nature. And for a devotee is empowered by Krishna directly or through his energies. So Prithu Maharaj, ultimately, even after he did so many wonderful things, he never took credit, because he understood that it's not me doing. Krishna's the doer. If we do bad things, then we have to take responsibility for not following what Krishna's done. But still, it's the modes of nature we're choosing to come under particular modes of nature to degrade us. Or we could choose to come under the influence or follow the dictations of the higher modes of nature and elevate us. Or we can choose to follow the direction of Krishna, coming through parampara, which liberate us. So we have the choice, but we're always influenced. So later on, Prithu Maharaj, for the sake of all of his citizens, he wanted to do 100 Aswamedha Yagyas. Now at that time, Indra, he had the world record. What was it, 99? Or did he do 100? He did 100. So Indra had the world record of 100. And Prithu Maharaj was about to tie that record. And then he was about to break it. Now for Indra, this is a very serious problem, because he worked really hard to be the only person who had ever done 100 Aswamedha Yagyas in this universal creation timeline where he was living. And he considered this a major threat. And in every possible way, whatever the means, he had to protect his record. It was not only a record, but when you have a lot, the tendency is you fear losing what you have. And the more you have to fear losing. Yes. Just like in this little room where the brahmacharis, they each have a little box. They have a lock on it. Most of them have a little lock. But if you go to the brahmachari ashram, you could just kick the lock and it'll open. Any thief, just one hit of a hammer, they open. They're not very security strong locks. If somebody emptied out their whole cupboard, I don't think any brahmachari would really care. Just somebody who's a little tiny bit charitable could fill it back up again. So there's not much fear, because there's not much to be afraid of. The more we have, the more we fear losing. And the more we have, the tendency is, it doesn't have to be this way, we become attached. We become extremely immersed in identifying ourselves with those things. And that's very much what material life is about. We identify with things. Janasya moho yamaham mameti. We identify with, I am this body, that's the beginning. And then whatever is in relationship to this body is mine. my family, my occupation, my prestige, my house, my furniture, my computer, my technological instruments, for children, my toys. When I was a little boy, my mother had a slogan that she would often say. She would say, "Toys are poison." Because there were 3 sons. And there was always fighting over toys. And for her, this was just absolutely ridiculous. What toys? They're all such stupid things, these toys, but why are you fighting over them? She said, "It's poison." But adults, they just have different types of toys and fight over them. You know, nuclear bomb toys. Toys of buildings and factories, and industries. It's all just toys. Child stuff playing for a self-realized soul who's actually grown up spiritually. When Srila Prabhupada first came to America, he often said the biggest problem in India is people are so attached to politics. That they think this is going to make a solution to the world. And therefore they don't care about spiritual life so much, or else it's just something in the background. So for Indra, by performing this 100 Asvamedha Yagyas, he had achieved so much. He had achieved the post of Indra. And he had achieved such immense wealth and immense power. So he naturally thought, if Prithu Maharaj can equal me or surpass me in doing those yagyas, then it must be because he wants what I have. This is a material conception. That the world is a mirror of our own mind. We often interpret according to the way we see. Prabhupada said, if you look through rose-colored glasses, everything looks rose-colored. If you look through yellow-colored glasses, everything's yellow-colored. So we are looking through our mind. The soul is looking to the world through the mind. And it's very much colored by our own envy, by our own passions, by our own arrogance and attachments. So Indra's seeing like this. This was a major threat, when actually Prithu Maharaj was just doing it for the welfare of all the citizens and for the pleasure of God. So he had to stop it. So each time he was sabotaging the yagyas, stealing the horses, and he was and every time they would try to catch him, he would disguise himself as a saintly person. And in this way, he was creating irreligion. He was creating terrible irreligion, doing serious damage to the whole universe, just to protect his own egoistic record. He didn't want to be matched. And Prithu Maharaj, seeing how Indra was engaged in such irreligious, immoral, cheating activities, criminal activities, Prithu Maharaj was about to arrest him and punish him. At that time, Lord Brahma came and told Prithu Maharaj, Indra is a devotee. He is engaged in service to the Lord. And he's doing a very important service. It's a fact. He has a big ego. And it is a fact that he's very attached to his position and he's very attached to his prestige. And it is a fact that he engaged in miserable, immoral activities for the sake of protecting his own prestige. But still, he's a devotee. He's part and parcel of Krishna. He's serving Krishna. And so are you. You're also part and parcel of Krishna, and you're also a devotee. So instead of creating this antagonism with him, just let him have the record. Don't do any more yajnas. And keep things peaceful. Brahma was seeing the bigger picture. And Prithu Maharaj immediately accepted. All right, I will not do any more yajnas. Let Indra have his position. Let him have the record forever. So Vishnu came down. And when Vishnu came down, the Supreme Lord, he didn't say really, he more or less just chastised Indra, but he was very pleased with Prithu Maharaj. He was pleased with Prithu Maharaj because he gave up something that was not very important for a higher principle. Whereas Indra, he was engaging in immoral activities for a lower principle because he wasn't willing to adjust things according to a higher principle. And this is Krishna consciousness. Ultimately, Indra was very embarrassed by the situation because he saw how the Lord was so pleased with Prithu Maharaj. Krishna consciousness means to see everything in relation to the higher principle of pure devotional service, of what will please Krishna. Prabhupada said you can show your love for me by how you cooperate. In Krishna consciousness. To keep that higher principle is really a challenge. And it's actually the way we show our love. To love someone in the spiritual sense, it's not based on how I want to love you. It's based on what do you want? That is love. It's not Prabhupada. I'm going to kick this devotee's face in every way I possibly can so that I can get ahead. That may be what you like. That may be what you think is showing love for Prabhupada because I can accomplish so much by doing that. But if it's not what Prabhupada wants, it's not love at all. It's just selfishness. So this is the challenge. How to cooperate in this age of Kali by adjusting every situation according to this higher principle of what it means to love Krishna, what it means to love the spiritual master, what it means to love the Vaishnavas. And these stories in Srimad Bhagavatam, Prabhupada explains that Shukadeva Goswami, he selected out of a vast history of the universe, he selected the most essential, important stories for the Srimad Bhagavatam that could reform one's character and bring one to the point of real prema bhakti, unalloyed love for God. You see, in matters of love, people don't really love you for what you accomplish. People might be impressed. People might be envious. People love you actually for your character. If you look among your friends, the people who you're most affectionate toward are people you love them because of their character, because of their goodness, not because of what they accomplished. And that's the way Krishna is. Prabhupada wanted us to accomplish things. But his books are all about building our character, a devotional character, because ultimately that's what Krishna sees. There are people who create unbelievable projects in this world for their own money or prestige. Prabhupada wasn't very impressed with that. But Yadubar Prabhu, there's Hollywood films. Prabhupada wasn't very impressed necessarily with these big blockbuster Hollywood films, but he was very impressed with Yadubar Prabhu's little documentary and a Fairchild projector. Even if it was playing too slow. Because of his character. He was doing it as a humble, sincere offering for the upliftment of humanity in the service of God. Yes? And that's the way Krishna sees. So the real disease is selfishness. And the real cure is selfless service. And as devotees, we have to take to heart the sacred principle of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, everyone here today, which touches your heart and impresses you deeper? Indra's accomplishment of performing 100 successful Ashwamedha Yajnas, or Prithu Maharaj's humility to accept the higher principle of cooperation, even if he would never touch the record. Which impresses you more? Well, you can say Hari Bol and we'll take a vote. How many are most impressed and your hearts are really deeply touched and you're really inspired by Indra protecting his world record? Say Hari Bol. How many are very much impressed and inspired to mold your life after Prithu Maharaj, who he put aside his own personal achievement to show the principle of higher character? How many vote for Prithu Maharaj? Yeah, be careful, because Indra's listening. But don't worry about it. It was a different Indra back then. So the Indra today is a different, it's a post. Indra's like president, right? It's a post. It's, every Manvantar there's a different Indra, so don't worry about it. I'm sure even today's Indra will vote for Prithu Maharaj. So we shouldn't be so greedy to accomplish things if it is undermining the higher principle. We have to be very enthusiastic and very eager to accomplish wonderful things for Krishna. But always, it must be with the focus of the higher principle. It always has to be harmonized with this higher principle of what will really please Krishna. And Krishna, we know what really pleases Krishna when we are not selfish, when we do not have ulterior motives, when we're actually in the spirit of the servant of the servant of the servant. And we're actually happy to see other people getting blessings and even doing better than us. That pleases Krishna. That's where real spiritual empowerment comes. And that's the spirit Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught us to chant the holy name.